Mike Potts is one of my favorite people in the tech space right now, not only for his amazing personality and just really great character, but also you guys have a really interesting way about thinking about technology for our audience here at Nail, right? Which is mid-market franchise executives, people who are in the home service space specifically. And Mike and I have a mutual client, Superior Fence and Rail, that we've been doing work together on for a long time. And one of the things that I love about how Mike and his team at Feature 23 run their operation is it's very much so outcome focused. They don't really get into the minutia of all the hype of AI and all the hype of tech that is everywhere right now. So again, thanks for coming on the show, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate being here, man. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. For the people who don't know you, I would love just to give a brief for you to give a brief introduction about who you are, what is Feature 23, what do you guys do mostly, and how did you kind of get into this world of tech?
We've been in business since 2008. I think what led us to start the company, me and Tracy, my co-founder, we wanted to exercise more control over how we applied our craft to the world around us. As you've probably noted, there's building software and then there's building software that ends up making a difference. And there's a giant disparity between just building and then actually building something that moves a business forward, whether it's improving the customer experience or yeah, we like to break it down into a couple of basic categories. You're either making the customer's life better, you're either growing the top line, or you're optimizing the bottom line. And at the end of the day, most software projects fit into one of those three categories. And taking the outcome centric approach is something that's not common still to this day. So we created the company in 2008. I think who we were then is a little bit different than who we are now. But really, what we wanted was control over our culture, our environment. We consider ourselves to be fairly precise, fairly driven, fairly aggressive towards what we consider to be the best software possible for a client. And a lot of that is, to be honest with you, less about the code and more about the business problem, where most of the projects that go awry for businesses, especially in the middle market, they don't know how to connect the dots between software just in its existence and the software needed to advance the state of their business. And so over the last nearly 20 years, we've gotten really good at, helping middle market companies create business-oriented outcomes with custom solutions. And you've seen that at Fence. Now, it helps that Fence is a really good client. They're really good at thinking in terms of outcomes.
Right.
So obviously they're one of our favorites. But yeah, I think
Right.
that's what led us down this road. COVID and the things that followed have really kind of forced us to hyper develop that sense of like outcome oriented, especially for the middle market. And then the
Yeah.
rise of AI, as you said a minute ago, there's a lot of people experimenting with it. Unfortunately, I think for many, it's just increasing their failure rate.
Yeah.
Getting AI to solve problems is I would say maybe a subspecialty to solving any problem with technology. Solving it with AI is a specialty within that. And there is this, you can create a bit of a formula there for people who don't know these things, but that's really our primary value prop even is, we help clients optimize their business through technology. And when you keep it simple, and approachable, what we find a lot of your middle market executives are actually really smart. They know what they're talking about from a business model perspective, where they wouldn't be in the middle market. It's when you want to bring, more advanced technology or digital solutions to that. Obviously, that's not their background. So helping them really figure out and find their way with that, I would say that's our area of expertise. And, my team would probably say certainty is our value prop, where the average failure rate is 70+% still. Our success rate with clients is north of 95% consistently over the last decade. So, certainty is really, that's our business model.
Yeah, 100%. And I love what you said about focusing less about the technology and the coding and more about the business
Yeah,
problem, right? Which I think now more than ever, especially with the rise of vibe coding and just making the barrier to entry for a lot of these technical solutions way lower than what it used to be. People get lost in the weeds of the tech stuff because it's easy now, right? Like anyone
right.
can go and create a base level software product and then market it and sell it for whatever. Like it's easy.
Right.
But I see this all the time where I look at a product or I look at someone who's trying to promote something. Someone comes on a podcast and they're trying to talk about like, hey, I have this really cool thing that I've built, but I struggle to find like, okay, what's the problem you're actually solving, right? What is the business issue? Like why does this product exist? Does it exist for the sole reason that now it's easy to build it? So you built it and now you're just trying to get people to buy it? Or does it exist because you found an issue with a certain type of client that needs to be solved and you could do it easily through software, right? So I love how you brought that up because I think that we have a very similar perspective when it comes to creating products around business problems instead of just building to build. And I think a lot of that translates into the AI bubble that everyone talks about, right? Like eventually, and I fully agree that eventually there is going to be some sort of pop, right? There's going to be some sort of
Right.
different, something's going to happen, right? Where a lot of those exact types of people that build just to build and don't really have a problem that they're solving are going to get washed away. But I think people like you and I and anyone else out there who are building around a problem, not around a product, are safe from that because we're solving real issues, right? And to find a new solution for those issues is a lot harder than what people think it is, especially in the mid market,
Right.
especially for franchising.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting. I actually happen to be a fan of the fact that everybody now has access to these tools. And, I've got a client, I'll give you an example. In the old days, I'd get a Word doc or, a text document that was basically like, hey, here's what we need. Now I get you know, a self-defined HTML file that's got a running prototype that allows us to explore the idea more deeply, more completely, more quickly than ever been able to do. Now, going from a can I conceptualize how to solve a problem to deploying something that's profitable long term, doesn't open the door to liability or risk, that's still an area of expertise that requires experience. But
Yeah.
I will tell you, because AI has become more a consumer facing tool, where I have clients that use those tools to explore these topics, we're building faster, higher value systems, lower cost. We're moving a whole lot quicker and a whole lot more precisely than we've ever been able to. And so what I would say is in the old days, they would spend a lot of money getting to a point where they can now more cost effectively get to that starting point, and they have more money and time to build on it. Whereas before, a lot of times they spent all their time and money just getting in the game. Now we
Yep.
can get in the game so quickly that we've got more time and money to adapt, go after certain segments, certain customer types. And for companies that can change their or reorient their thinking this way, it really does move the needle. It's not a
Mhm.
one size fits all tool. And I think the biggest challenge, honestly, is the learning curve. And it takes a certain amount of time with the tools to see where they fit and how they actually help relative to each role or responsibility. But
Yeah.
where they're being adopted and they're being adopted relative to individual personal process, we're seeing a lot of gains within at least our craft. I think
Yep.
that the part that's still challenging is, scaling that gain up beyond the individual to the team or the organization. AI still isn't good at you know sharing that context up in a way that's meaningful, but a lot of that comes back to humans who have never had to share context at that level. That's a new
Right.
skill that they're still learning. But having said that, I think the other thing a lot of companies are now starting to realize is, yes, you use AI to build this thing, but now it's a thing. It's like a car. You can't buy a car and not change the oil, right? So,
Exactly.
yes, you can build the asset more quickly and more cost effectively, but that just means you still have to own it. So if you're using AI to, order of magnitude, build more software, people are realizing like, wait, now we have to maintain this thing. And
Right.
where AI is very, very good at getting you in the game, it's not necessarily as good at maintaining that thing because that gets you back to the shared context thing. A
Yep.
salesperson wants to change this, the executive wants to go left with strategy. Well, AI isn't able to use empirical data to use intuition to make those judgment calls. And so,
Yep.
you know, I'm sure that that will change as people, vibe coding grows as it's going to naturally, and people will learn these skills. But it really comes back to the degree to which a team can work together through AI and less about is any one individual, getting good at it or not. It's that team game, which is the current focus. And where we see teams focusing on it, they're seeing incremental gains. And I will tell you this, teams that get over the hump never go back. Like it's
Yeah.
really hard to go back to working without AI once you figure it out. But yeah,
Yeah.
we're still very early in it for sure.
Oh yeah, and I like what you said about how we're using it for a lot of individual gain right now, which is completely true, and we're using it for improving upon and making current internal processes on the individual level way faster, right? Like even we talk
Right.
about that for our tech team, like the amount of tools that we can use now instead of doing this all manually or having to like for example diagnosing problems, right? Before that would be a multi-hour process where you would have to actually go in and find exactly where the gap was and figure out okay why did that
Right.
happen, and then you'd have to switch between four different applications to try and right. But now you can just throw it into an application yourself, Cursor, Cloud Code, whatever it might be, and have it do all of that upfront analysis for you. And then your personal expertise comes in on the back end to say, okay, now what do we do about that? Which I think is probably one of the reasons why we've been able to move so fast and troubleshoot a lot of the things that we troubleshoot on a day-to-day basis is because of that, right? Like without that process, we would be making decisions way slower. And so
Right.
I think speed is kind of the end all be all when it comes to why this technology is important for people. Not that it can do things that couldn't be done before, but it's doing them a lot faster than what we would have been able to do. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think one subtle note there, before AI, we had to worry about making things human consumable. And speaking on the diagnostic front for a second, we have logs galore in our craft, right? We have, App Insights, there's so many logging tools. But there was always a focus on making sure that we reduce the noise in a logging tool so that the humans could find the issue more easily.
Yep.
Well, we have to worry less about that now because, to your point, I can funnel all that into a session with Claude, and Claude can see it all pretty much instantaneously and find the outliers for me, right?
Yep.
So, it's changing the way we build because now I want more data for diagnostics. Before I was like, hey, be careful you don't put crap in the logs because then somebody has to, like, the logs get big and,
Yep.
signal noise problem. Claude is making it so easy for me to just funnel all the data in and say, hey, help me correlate and look for outliers, and it's way more efficient and effective than I'll ever be, even with a clean logging. So yeah, it's changing a lot in that regard because now I want
Yeah.
all the data.
Yeah. You want all the context, everything
I
that you
want
could
all
possibly
of
get.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. No, I love that. I want to talk a little bit about how you got into kind of this mid-market segment, right? So you guys have been around
Yeah.
since 2008, right? You've worked in a lot of different industries, but what about mid-market and specifically home service related franchising kind of attracted you when you came into Superior
Yeah.
Fence? Why did that pull you in, and what opportunity did you see there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely love that question. I would say focus. So
Mm,
when you look at all of the people building, custom solutions in the world, startups, they're fun, but they don't know who they are yet. They don't know who their customer is. In many regards, they're still trying to figure it out. And what we found ourselves telling the startup is don't build, sell. In fact,
yep.
we used to challenge startups. Like, if you want me to build something, I need you to bring me a list of people who bought something off of a PowerPoint before we, because what ends up happening is we spend all your time and money building something that never sells. So
Yep.
sell, then we'll build. And a lot of startups don't like to hear that, right? Like,
Yep.
well, I need a product to sell. No, you don't actually.
Yep.
So we've also done work with the Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000. The challenge there is, they're working on a horizon which is many years into the future. So the work that you do may never matter to the Fortune
Yep.
500. In fact, they may change strategies 4 or 5 times. And in order to make a difference within that, you have to be well into like year 2 or year 3. But the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, they're playing on a scale where time and money a lot of times don't matter. And it's difficult to deliver something of high efficacy in that environment because we're many years away from even knowing if all the time and money we spend on this even matter,
Yep.
right? So when you cut away those two, that leaves you with the middle market. And what's great about the middle market organization is they have a highly competitive environment. Focus is very real for them. They know
Yep.
exactly who their customer is. They know what their operational definitions are. Being successful in the middle market is a highly focused game, primarily around efficacy. Can we be effective? Can we, and again, it's a constant conversation on, we're either growing the top line or optimizing the bottom line. And software, especially proprietary solutions, are very good at those two things. And so what we found in the middle market is just a customer who really needs what we're good at and values it.
Yep.
And they're willing to examine, assumptions that maybe the Fortune 500, you're not going to get a Fortune 500 to change their culture or
Yep.
go left. A
Yep.
middle market company will see an angle or an opportunity and be super aggressive, if not careful and conservative. They're not reckless.
Yep.
Again, that really kind of aligns well with our focus on efficacy and precision. So, and then the other thing is the middle market has a really difficult time finding the kind of talent they need to succeed from a digital perspective. So,
Yeah.
we solve a sourcing problem and they provide the focus that we need to be very good at what we do. And for the middle market companies that really do well with us, it comes down to they have a clear strategy. They know how to develop that strategy, and it's really about execution. It's not about who are we today. The startup, I don't know who my customer is. Middle market
Yeah.
knows their customer very well, and they know what their problems are. And so they, even even though they're not experts at software or building software, they're experts at the problem. So it allows us
Yes.
to work really well with the middle market organization. And speaking to home service and franchising, you what's great about the franchise-based models, in every franchise-based model, we have another layer of experts that are even closer to the problem than the franchisor. So we have
Yep.
many sources of expert info that we can take advantage of. At that point,
Yep.
it's just a matter of, really partnering with the experts in the system and helping them succeed in the overall mission, which is, for fence, it's putting really high quality fences in the ground.
Yep.
Everything else is focused on helping installers do that, right? So, you know, it's easy for me to ask, well, how can technology help? The experts always have ideas, they always have opinions. And so it's, execution of our craft combined with execution of their craft. And it just works really well in the middle market.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with the piece of you have so much more experts in
Yeah,
franchising than you do in something like that. Maybe it's a multi-location business or something similar, right? Of similar size, but they don't have that level of advocacy at each level, right? Which I think is super fun. And it goes back to exactly what we just talked about with now we want all the data, right? Like beforehand, we
right,
wanted the smallest
right,
amount of data that was get rid of all the noise, right? What's the data that actually matters? Now it doesn't matter. Like we want to hear from everyone.
yeah,
And just in our experience working with the same type of clients, it's the same thing, right? Where it's like, great, that's why we run pilot programs is so that we can get all of that data from those individual locations as quickly as possible so that we can improve upon the product even faster, right? And so I love that point because it's like I don't think people I think a lot of founders or builders or people in our space look at that and see it as an operational drag, right? They see that as like another
right,
relationship you have to curate, another person you have to keep tabs on, another person that might have complaints, support tickets, etc. But I see
right.
that as a massive opportunity because if you can be the one to go in and really push onto those people and say, hey, I'm here for you guys. Like, granted, these people hired us, right? Like these people up here, they were the ones who brought us in, but we're really here to make your life easier. So how can we do that? Like that, if you can really dive into that, that opens up a whole nother level of intimacy that you don't get with some of those higher Fortune 500,000 companies, which I love personally because it's a whole
Yeah.
different
Well,
experience from
you saw
the
that play
people
out.
side.
You saw
Yeah.
that play out at the fencing conference when the one franchise owner said, hey, if I could see it this way, it would fundamentally change the way I think about. And I was able to call from the conference my team and say, hey, let's model this. And again, using AI based tools, we were able to put an entire demo and prototype together just 3 days later.
Yep.
We rolled that out within 1 to 2 business weeks, and it changed the way they look at their territories and evaluate certain problems. That was
Yep.
a very expensive, very human involved, problem. And it took us one conversation at a conference with an expert. We verified their thinking with a prototype just a couple of days later, and we made a notable improvement to the entire platform because one expert bothered to voice an idea. And
Yeah.
yeah, we're in a different world. When you have, and to Fence's credit, Superior Fence and Rail, they trust us with their experts in a manner
Right.
that allows me to spend time with them. We don't always get that trust,
Yep.
but it really worked out well in that example. And we've had 3 or 4 with that same expert just
Yeah.
this year. And so
Yeah.
once he sees like, hey, my voice is heard, hey, I have this other idea and another idea. We've got a whole rocket ship being built around this one expert's ability to see it differently. And everybody loves what's coming out of that relationship. It's fantastic.
Yep. Yep. 100% agree. And I'm sure that we've had the same conversations with the same expert too.
Probably so.
Um,
Yeah.
so sitting on the technology side of watching operators try and scale, because I mean, especially when you came into Superior Fence, like they were not what they are now when you guys started, right? And so you really kind of were there for the whole process of them going from just couple dozen locations to, I mean, hundreds now that they're at multi hundreds of millions dollars in sales. Like you
Yeah.
kind of watched that whole process. So in your experience sitting on the tech side of that, what mistake do you see most consistently? Maybe not specifically from Superior Fence, but just kind of across the board in that middle market segment. Like, what is the things that leadership keep repeating that you see as quietly costing them growth, time, money, etc.?
Yeah. I'll tell you the single biggest one, and It's interesting, and I'll use the relationship and discussion on superior to demonstrate how they negate this, because they're very good at negating this particular thing. And it's what we call the understanding gap. There was a very smart individual who published, I guess he did an interview. There's a video of it. I'll have to dig it up, but he did a presentation on this at a Harvard Business School, conference of some type. And what he had spent a couple of decades proving out was that there's an understanding gap in every organization. There's what the executive team thinks is happening. There's what middle management thinks is happening. And then there's what your experts in the trenches are seeing every day.
Yep.
And when you separately interview those people, you're able to see, like, wow, my experts that are dealing with the problem every day don't see it the same way as the executive team. But you've got the executive team making decisions strategically based on, a misunderstanding of the problem. So the understanding gap is a
Yep.
very real problem in organizations, especially where they're trying to bring technology in any shape or form to the problem. If the perspective from the leadership team is different than the people doing the work, you're misaligned from day one. So, like, one of the things we do very heavily up front on any new engagement is we try to suss out the understanding gap and make sure that we're on the same page. You've got to
Yep.
have shared understanding. Second, there has to be focus, right? And that'll lead to my third point. But the second point on focus, a lot of companies fail to accept the reality of who they are.
Mm.
Instead, they read all these things online. I'll pick on cloud when it became big. Suddenly we were in project meetings and people were saying, hey, we've got to be on the cloud. And we would ask questions like, why do you have to be on the cloud? Aren't all your network engineers on-prem engineers? Aren't you really good at on-prem? And the answer was yes, but we need to be on the cloud. Well, you're trying to build a project around somebody you want to be, but aren't in reality. And that
Yep.
project isn't going to go well. And I have several examples, probably the most extreme of which we had a client finance just claim to that. This is the project. This is the project that's going to get us on the cloud. Cloud's got to be a part of the project. It delivered several months late and several hundreds of thousands of dollars over budget because they didn't know how to do cloud. They didn't know how to secure it. They didn't know. They could have delivered business value by accepting that we're on-prem. Yeah, is it sexy? Not really. Should
Yeah.
we be on the cloud someday? Yes, but we're not a cloud organization. Stay within the box. Be okay with who you are and deliver within who you are. Separately, leading to the third point, I don't think enough organizations leverage research to figure out who they need to be in the future. Like, when you
Yeah.
figure out who you want to be, that's the purview of research and development. Use R&D to figure out how to go from who you are to who you want to be, but
Yeah.
don't deliver projects that way, because that forces a cultural shift that doesn't tend to go well. So I would say those are the three biggest things that, and when we go into a new engagement with a new client, that's what we map out. The very
Mhm.
first thing we do is we try to understand, do they accept who they are, or are they living in I wish we were land? Because that's going to be very, very difficult to deliver. Do they
Yeah.
have good focus? And are they honest about the understanding gap? Is leadership willing to trust their experts in the field have the right view of the problem? Or are they going to do, this is the classic mistake, well, no, they shouldn't be doing it that way. Well, they might not should be doing it that way, but that's how it's getting done every day.
Right.
So, and it's crazy how few organizations walk down the hall and simply eliminate or understand the gap before they start making very expensive investments and build strategies. And then 12 months later, they're like, hey, why did this project fail? Well, because you built on a problem that isn't real.
Yeah.
And the experts won't use the tool because it didn't solve their problem. That happens so often still to this day, George. And because AI is so easy to deploy, it's happening more frequently and more quickly with AI.
Yeah.
Because again, it comes back to, an executive said, hey, let's use AI to solve a problem. And the experts are like, hey, we got AI, but it didn't solve the problem. And people aren't closing like very fundamental points about the understanding gap or who we are in reality. I
Yeah.
think it's fine to experiment with AI from an R&D perspective, but don't roll it out if it's not who you are yet. Right? You
Yeah.
got to put that on the
I
spectrum.
I could not agree with you more. We had a franchise that came to us and had a similar mindset, right? Where they knew who they wanted to be. They had this goal of like where they wanted to go. And they knew like, oh, AI, I've got to be using AI somehow. And then I sat on a call with them in this chair and I spoke to them and I said, like, why are we on this call? Like, what are you trying to learn from me here? And he said, well, I've heard, everyone's using AI and I know that we need to be using it. I just am trying to find where. And I was like, we could end this call immediately because I already know that this is not going to be a good engagement because you are looking to solve a problem with a product that you don't have the need for yet. Like, and we talked about, I
Right.
was like, what does your lead volume look like? What is your average store doing in sales? Like, what is your asking all these questions I need to know? And they just didn't have the volume to justify the cost of what it would take to build out a voice AI solution like what we have. And I was like, you're
Right.
solving the wrong problem, or you're solving the right problem, but way too early. Like, you need to solve your demand issue like years before you even get into before you even think about what you're doing right now. I was like, if you want to use AI, figure out how to use AI to solve your demand problem, but you don't need to solve your conversion issue if your demand problem is not even solved. So I was like,
Right.
I completely agree. And I think so many people, I think it has to do with not only how much tech and how quickly things move, it's how much is pushed on us in media, and how much is saying like, oh, if you don't do this, you're going to fall behind. If you
Right.
don't, it's same thing with cloud, right? It's the same scenario, but just however many years beforehand, right? And people think that to get to where they want to go, they have to have the things. It's like saying that, like, to be a billionaire, I have to fly private. No, it's
Right.
the other way around, right? Like, you're not going
Right.
to get to be a billionaire because you fly private. No, you fly private because you're a billionaire, right? It's the same situation. So I see that happen all the time. And I think it comes from, and I've never ran a franchise, so I will be the first to admit that I have a skill gap here, but I think it comes from a little bit of naivete around where around your bottleneck. Like, what's your real bottleneck, right? And not what do you think other people want you to have, or what do you think
Yeah.
you should have
I'll
because
say
of.
this. As a business owner, I will say it is difficult.
Oh
It's
yeah, of course.
difficult, and just using my own, challenges as an example for a second. You look out into the world, and if I were to follow what's online, I should have shut down already because AI is going to close all consulting companies, right? So, like, okay,
Right.
as a CEO, I can choose how I conceptualize and contextualize, right? Well,
Yeah.
but I can also just reach out to my clients and I can explore this. I've got a network that's like, okay, how do I get well informed on the topic so I can use this correctly? My favorite device though, because this comes back to like, can you be honest about who you are?
Yep.
When we deal with companies that ask us that question and it's AI or it's some other technology, the question is, I like to invert it. There was a fantastic book written, probably 2 decades ago. It doesn't get enough credit. I think people moved on, but I still use this every day. It's called impact mapping. If you have a good sense of what your business is and your business model, you can ask yourself some very basic questions about the business model. What
Hmm.
impact are you trying to make and what are my options? Right? Impact mapping causes you to invert the way you look at the problem. Custom software is just one way to make that impact, but it's not oftentimes the best way to make that impact. And by teaching people how to look at their business model through the eyes of impact mapping, we're able to help them discover, like, wait, there's this other way more cost effective. I've gotten off a couple of calls, George, where I told somebody to hire a team of summer interns. It'll be cheaper, it'll be right, and it'll go away. And then you won't have all this complexity and burden within the business model. It's a short
Yep.
term problem, and let me walk you through this from an impact mapping perspective and demonstrate it's a short term problem. In reality, I think, and I might sound like an old guy here for a second, but there was a time where the business model was a simpler thing. I
Yeah.
will say, as technology and as businesses become more technology forward, trying to define or shape like what my business model is becomes an ever evolving thing. And AI has reduced the barrier to entry to call yourself a business to the point that, like, can we really even say we know what a business model is at this point? And I think, I'm a big fan of Drucker, and Drucker kind of predicted that this would happen. He said over time, companies would evolve to be a small group at the top with a bunch of outsourced or labor, outsourced solutionists. But the
Yep.
companies would get smaller at the top because technology would continue to evolve. People aren't teaching people how to think this way, though. And so naturally, what they're doing is they're using the info they see online, LinkedIn, Facebook, the other sources of info that they're using. I'm like, well, obviously, this is what everybody else is doing. They don't know how to contextualize it because they don't know how to define who they are. They don't know how
Yep.
to assess impact and moving in the right direction. It's not taught in school, unfortunately. Like, I think the current version of business model still taught in MBA programs is still a la 1990. Like, we're
Oh my
still
God.
getting into some newer versions, but a lot of people punt and they say, read Eric Ries, read Steve Blank. I'm a big fan of Steve Blank, by the way, so you should go read Steve Blank. But there's more to it than that. Like, that
Yeah.
started the conversation like 2 decades ago. Like, a lot has happened since then. McKinsey doesn't have it all covered, and so a lot of people, like, their
Oh my
their get out
God.
of jail free card is like, we'll get a McKinsey or a Gartner subscription.
Right.
And yes, that's more data, but
Right.
if you don't know how to put that data in motion, and you're pretending to be something you're not, like, it won't matter what data you're using. But people, they They don't know how to assess who are we and what impacts make the biggest difference. They get lost. At the end of the day, it comes down to your customer, your top line, your bottom line. It's not any more complicated than that.
Yeah, no, you're right on the money. As someone who just left a business program a month and a half ago, I will admit that you are right on the money. When man,
Yeah.
the things that they're teaching are 15 years too late. That's yeah. You, I could say a million things about what you just said. I love that. I want to pose this theory that I have to you though, and see what you think about it. I have
Sure.
this term that I like to call the workaround tax. Right. I've written about it in the past recently, and I've also spoke about it on podcasts too. Which the workaround tax is the hidden cost of a bad software that never really shows up on any balance sheet, on any report, or anything like that. One thing that is the most clear example that I can give is the solution that the Superior Fence corporate stores was using before they brought on Nail. I don't remember if you remember the name of them, but I don't want to like drop any,
Yeah, I can't remember.
names.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you tested it or not, but basically it was just a really, really, really bad version of voice AI receptionist. And I use this term, the workaround tax, to contextualize decisions that are made like that, to say we need this type of technology. People are saying that we need to implement AI. So let's find the easiest, most accessible, most cost-effective version that we can to get in the game and start to, get this ball rolling. But I think there's a hidden tax there, right? There's a hidden, especially financial pitfall in that example, where I heard over and over and over again from the internal staff at those corporate stores that they were actively losing customers from that software because it was just a terrible customer experience, right? Like they would pick up the phone. It was very clearly evident right off the bat that they were talking to AI. The AI wasn't actually able to help people, couldn't book appointments, couldn't answer any questions that people had no nuance in the way that it spoke to these people based on their needs, right? Like it was very much so
Right.
a basic solution. And I think that happens not only in that specific type of technology, but in all of software, right?
Right. Right.
Having this hidden cost of bad software that doesn't actually show up on any balance sheet, so it's hard to quantify. But I wanted to pose that to you and ask, what do you think the most painful version of that, or what do you think another version of that you've seen play out inside of kind of this middle market area that you can recall as being like a big issue?
Yeah. So we have a similar name. We call it operational tax because it aligns back to operations quite clearly. And it is an operational cost that, to your point, it doesn't necessarily show up as a line item in, on a balance sheet somewhere. But the way it presents itself is either through customer experience or employee experience or partner experience. The experience is bad. And a lot of times it's not that the idea was wrong, it's that the execution was wrong. And that's what contributed to the operational tax. Well, so maybe there's something to solving the problem, but we just chose the wrong solution. And that solution's creating so much operational tax that it's actually created more harm than good.
Yeah.
And learning to spot operational tax is something that takes experience, unfortunately, because, and I'm going to say something that might sound negative. However, it's real nonetheless. The average employee is used to having to make do with bad decisions that they weren't a part of.
Yeah.
The average employee is given solutions all the time as part of their employment experience. Like, hey, the company's decided to do X or the company's decided to do Y. And employees, this goes back to the understanding gap to a certain extent. Employees will invariably say, well, this is stupid. And somebody will say, it might be stupid, but this is what the company's doing. You can measure a lot about a culture based on its ability and willingness to examine the operational tax of these types of decisions. If and what we will often see, I'll give you the one that is most often cited. Our last Fortune 500 organization was really bad in this regard. You had a technologies team, the IT team, the central team, which set apart from the rest of the organization, a little bit astronaut architect here. And they would make technical decisions on how the platform should be built based on a bunch of ethereal compliance and regulatory requirements like security. And your forward teams would work with business units to try and deploy solutions. Well, the business unit and the team that they source that work to has no control of the infrastructure. So you have to accept that, like, if you're going to build here, you have to build this way. Well,
Yep.
we developed a set of heuristics, ethical concerns, where we will literally call a client and say that it's ethically, we can't be your partner because the operational tax is so much higher than any business value I can deliver within this, that the right thing for me to do is to say I'm not the right partner. Because we don't want to continue spending somebody's money knowing that we're never going to deliver the business value that they need or want because the operational tax is so high. But for us, when we go into I'll give you a bit of a grounding. There's a book by Billy Cohen called The Universal Method, and it explores the definition of what's called the engineering method. We love it because it's separate from the scientific method. The scientific method's job, if you dig into the scientific method, it's about creating knowledge. The engineering method is about solving problems. So when you're asked by a firm to come in and solve a problem, it's on you, the team, to assess the operational tax and make sure that it's a part of the conversation. When we're asked to solve a problem, we have to look at the resources that we have access to, but we also have to acknowledge the constraints. Operational tax is a universal constraint. Every organization has some operational tax. If we can't examine the operational tax, and we can't discuss how it might impact, positive or negative, the outcome of this project, we walk away from those engagements. Because if you can't, a lot of times our delivering a solution is going to require you to redefine your operations and therefore reorient with that operational tax. If that's no bueno, then there's no reason to spend the money up front, because we're going to get there. We're going to say, hey, look at the solution. And for whatever reason, we're going to be told, well, operating tax wins. So that concept that you call the workaround tax is a very big part of how we define engagements with clients. And if it's not clear, let's say the client doesn't self-identify and we discover it, as we're working, all of our principal consultants are trained to raise their hand and say, hey, we've got to talk about this because it's something we didn't know existed and is going to play a notable role in whether this project is deemed successful or not, right? If the success factors are a 10x return on investment, but all we can offer is Pareto because of the operating tax, we have to raise our hand and talk about it. But that operating tax is a big deal, and it plays out in every organization we've delivered for in our entire existence. Operating tax is a very real thing.
Yeah, I love that. It's a much better and more thought out explanation than what I had. But
I had 2 decades. I had 2 decades to figure that one out.
I've been thinking about that one for about 2 months. So give me a little bit, and I'll get there.
Yeah. Read the book, Universal Method. I think you'll like it. It'll help you frame that for people you're working with.
I love that. No, I think that's a great idea. The other thing that is really interesting to me is this concept behind build versus buy, right? A lot of people from the outside might look at an organization like Superior Fence and say, there's so many other options out there for software that could do, again, generalizing here from the outside, the same thing that Fence 360 would do, right? And I'm sure you've had this conversation many of times, but a lot of brand presidents that might be listening to this too haven't really made any technology investment decision that isn't just a subscription to another platform that is used widely across the industry, right? How do you talk to that type of person when it's time to think about their tech stack differently? And what level of growth usually happens when that conversation begins?
That's a great question. So the focus starts first with their secret sauce. And I'll use Superior as an example of this because it's a fantastic example, actually. I have another client even who came to us and said, hey, we need a platform. And we spent 3 months making her go shop to make sure there wasn't an off-the-shelf solution before committing her to a platform build. But it comes back to your secret sauce. And to kind of exemplify that secret sauce, I asked a longtime franchisor recently, let's say I wanted to own a Superior Fence and, rail franchise. Do they think it's still worth it? And his response to me was actually really enlightening. He said, I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't want to compete against us because our operating model is so good. It's so precise. We've solved so many problems in the way we sell, the way we deliver, and the way we install. So in that regard, when you look at the platform, it's meant to heighten their secret sauce, the things that make them unique, that make them competitive. You don't get that with an off-the-shelf solution, right? And if you were to deliver that with an off-the-shelf solution, what ends up happening is you end up tailoring your operations to fit the off-the-shelf solution. Well, now I'm competing against other fencing franchises that use the same off-the-shelf. And if I call my partner and say, hey, can you change the software to do this for me? Well, you're now making every other fencing franchise that uses the platform able to do the same thing. And so it really comes down to how important it is in your business model to protect your competitive differentiators. And if your operating model is a competitive differentiator, you have to protect that. So by building the platform, it allows me to have a very, whiteboard level hallway conversation with the executive team. When they come and say, we might let, you as an example, a franchise might call me in an hour and say, hey, Potts, can we change Fence 360 to do this? Well, what we do with that is we then go back to the franchise teams and the advisory council and say, hey, is there value in adding this to the platform such that it strengthens the operating model for everybody? If the answer is no, then we don't put it in the system, right? Because
Yep.
we can likely buy an off-the-shelf solution to solve that one franchise's problems. But if one of the franchises finds a way, going back to our expert earlier, to improve everybody's competitive advantage across the nation, then we get that into the system as quickly as we can. So it's about protecting your competitive differentiators or your secret sauce. If
Mhm.
if we're trying to make a decision and it's not relative to our secret sauce, buy off the shelf, because that doesn't make you special, right?
Yeah.
Anything that doesn't make you special, use a off the shelf solution. You should only look to build if you're trying to compete or protect your competitive differentiators, at which point then you own the IP that makes you special. And when you look at a brand like SFNR, who's one of the top nationally franchises in the home improvement, like, it's clear that their competitive differentiators made a difference in their ability to really reach the top of that craft. And I can tell you, when I'm in business conversations with outsiders, advisors, or people looking at the business model, they single out the tech stack every single time.
Yep.
So we love anything that makes that business model more unique, more special, or more competitive. That's what goes in the product. Everything else goes off the shelf.
Yep. Yep. I love that because you again are back to the beginning of our conversation, are solving for a problem, not for
Right.
just a product, right? And you're
Right.
allowing that tech to mold itself around the problem and not the problem mold itself around the tech, which is
Well, and I will say
happens all the time.
too, there was your orientation with that is going to change based on your scale. When
Yeah.
Superior was just 10 franchises or 15, we approached build versus buy differently. But when
Yeah.
you become 150, like, that becomes a critical part of, what decisions we make. But we also need to protect that now because, one of the things that I think makes Superior Fence and Rail special is the platform allows them to onboard franchises in a very systemic way, making it easy for
Yeah.
the franchise to come in, reach profitability, and use a system that's known to work. You know, is it perfect? No, no franchise model is perfect, but it's better than, buying something off the shelf and somebody saying, hey, I did it this way, I did it that way. So as you're, if you are a friend, your relationship to build versus buy will change as your business grows and you end up with more franchises in the model. But
Yeah.
the investment
100%.
then is typically more justifiable when you cross over into 30, 40, 50, or 100. Your ability to make adjustments or invest in protecting your competitive differentiations become a more viable conversation too.
Right. Right. Because then it's more important for that level of scale that they're about to
Right.
reach as well.
Right.
So no, I
Well,
completely agree.
if you can turn the dial for 2% per franchise across 100 franchises, those are very real dollars very, very quickly.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I say all the time. Where like, sure, you might not see like 2x, 3x growth on your investment of whatever you're putting in here, but multiply that across 150
Right.
franchises and you have some real dollars that are getting cashed here. Love that point.
Yep.
Three more questions. One of them, maybe two of them are more of a personal one for me.
Sure.
This one being one of them. Feature 23, you guys never raised outside capital and you guys have been bootstrapping since 2008, which is rare for a tech firm. And it's a philosophy that I like to stick by too. I'm not a huge fan of outside investment. I think I've gone down that road before, and it brings in people who think they have more of a decision making. It brings in people who think they have more weight because they just put money down than someone who might be a little bit more better at decision making. But regardless, I'm trying to keep it vague here. But anyways, how has saying bootstrap for you guys shaped the way you think about building not only client relationships, but also saying no to the wrong client relationships?
Yeah, it keeps you honest is the simple answer. It keeps you honest. There's no room for error, so you have to focus on the right things. And time and again, we work with teams that raise money, and there's this belief. I just came out of a relationship with a vendor through one of my clients that was a great example of this. Silicon Valley company raised $160 million. Our experience was horrendous. The general philosophy is, well, we'll make it up on the next customer. If you raise money, it comes with the understanding that we're probably not going to be able to do a good job on all customers. And that's supposed to be a part of the product market fit. When you're in services, you don't have the luxury to burn through clients like that.
Yeah.
You know, so for us, not having that raise forces us to be honest both about our clients and what they need and what the market demands. So
Yep.
if I wanted to raise now, we probably could because we are profitable. We have navigated some really just tremendously difficult things over the last 5 years, and we're doing well. So, having said that, services is a little bit different than product.
Yeah.
I think raising money in services, if you're not a high growth or you don't take the ThoughtWorks approach, if you will, those capital opportunities are a little bit different, and that's not why we created the company. But we created the company because we wanted control over the culture. We wanted control over the attitude we bring to the work every day, the client relationships. And we haven't needed to raise money to have a successful company. And as a result, those of us who work at Feature were very happy. The core group of us have been together 12, 14, 15, 16 years in some cases. We're a very tight knit group. We love what we get to do every day. So we didn't really need to raise. Now, we are building a product. We're going through product market fit, which we're paying for. I happen to believe that before you go out and convince other people to invest money in your product, you need to be willing to spend your own and prove that there's a market for that product. If
Yep.
our product market fit goes well, we will seek a traditional raise, but from the right type of investor. But we've been at this 2 decades. We've got a network full of advisors and investors that we think we can intelligently shop this to. But I think the second, as a startup, you make yourself or your life dependent on your raise succession, you set yourself on a path to building the wrong kind of company. And when you look at the failure rates, it's rare to see a unicorn anymore because there's just too much left and right. The world's
Yeah.
shifting too quickly. And a lot of times between your A, B, and C somewhere, you end up building the company you didn't envision, but you don't have a choice because that's what keeps the money flowing. It just, I don't have any interest in going that route without a good reason. So,
Yeah.
honestly speaking, we just haven't needed to. We're doing okay, bootstrapped. Our clients keep us honest and everything stays sane as a result. Again, if the product
Yeah.
goes well, check back with me in 6 months. I may be out here beating the drum trying to raise some money.
All right. Well, I'll get you back on in 6 months then. No, I love how you said it all boils down to keeping you honest, not only
Yeah,
about who is the right fit for you to serve, but also how you serve them, right? You're not trying to create something out of thin air. It really forces you to, honestly, in my opinion, build a better business because you're focusing on what the customer
right.
cares about and not what people up here might care about, right?
Correct.
And at the end of the day, that's business, right? You are providing something to a client that they are willing and able to trade their money for because they think it is going to give them more value than whatever that dollar amount was. And at the end of the day, the larger that gap can be between what they're getting and what they're paying, the better because they'll stick around longer, they'll value you more, the perceived quality of whatever you're doing for them goes up. And so
Right.
I think it forces you to build a better business, but I understand why. And again, we're technically also in the services realm too. Like SaaS is a little bit different, but it's technically in the same area. And I completely agree that it's a lot harder to do when you do what we do, which is so much more deeply entrenched in what a business's processes are, because you don't have something that you're pushing to the masses. But again, I
Right.
would love to hear your opinion on that 6 months from now when you
Yeah.
guys have something else to show. But yeah, I am along those same lines. Last question that I wanted to ask, and this goes around the acquisition of Superior Fence. And I know we talk a lot about Superior Fence, but it's relevant to any other franchise as well because it's the same.
Yeah.
They followed a similar path that a lot of other franchises have followed, and I think a lot of franchises should look to Superior Fence for a lot of the things that they did. But Fence 360, in a lot of the documentation, if you go back to their acquisition by Empower, which was at that point Outdoor Living Brands, a lot of the cited reasoning for why their acquisition was so successful by that company was around Fence 360, right? And that's a pretty big claim, not coming from you guys, right? Coming from the investors, coming
Right.
from the people that are putting money down for this sort of thing. First of all, that's pretty cool to hear from your end. Be like, hell yeah, it is,
Yeah.
like, right? But second off, what do you think? And this might go back to a little bit of your point around protecting the competitive advantage, but what did the technology actually unlock that made the business more acquirable? And what do you think franchise operators miss out on when they don't have that same unlock?
Yeah. I would say, from my perspective, the technology unlocked, efficacy at scale. And in a franchise model, scaling is the point.
Yeah.
Your ability to profitably scale, one franchise at a time or three or four or five at a time and not lose the consistency in the operating model is the entire point of being a franchisor. And the
Yeah.
degree to which the technology, enables or heightens the ability to scale and maintain that efficacy is the degree to which the technology is contributing to the overall business model itself. So it's the consistency, it's the visibility, it's the reportability, it's the efficacy, And within that, I would say the double-edged sword, you've got to strike a balance between knowing what you manage and measure and what you leave open for the franchise to tailor to their market, right? People in Oregon buy different fences than people in Wyoming or people in Denver or people in Florida. So the technology stack has got to find a balance between, what it focuses on from a scale or efficacy perspective and what it still leaves open for the franchise to solve at a local market level. And I think Superior Fence and Rail just really nailed that balance.
Mm.
And when you look at the current challenge, the creative tension within the business model, we're down to, hey, this market has these challenges. Should it be in the software?
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's the healthy tension in any franchise model. Beyond that, the ability to get to a point where that's the conversation we're having. And it's not like, hey, well, how does Jacksonville operate? Wait, how does Denver operate? No, the technology ensures a certain amount of continuity across the program. And
Yeah.
I think that's, in any franchise model, going back to the competitive differentiation, if your operating model is the competitive differentiation, then if you're not using technology to protect that, you're giving that away to somebody else, or you're using human labor. And to be honest, no company on the buy side wants to see, human intensive systems that, should have been replaced by technology. So he's got to give the leadership team at Superior Fence and Rail credit. They've always been aggressive about the use of technology to scale the operating model to protect that efficacy. And they've been advocates from the get-go, fervent believers that the technology will be the difference. Again, when you're 15, it's a belief. When you're 140 and growing, it's proof, So
Yeah.
some of it is they had to be willing to believe in it.
Yeah. 100%. And it's so cool that you've been able to watch that all the way from belief to proof, which is
Yeah, no doubt.
a treasure for sure. Awesome, man. Well, where can people find you? Where can people learn more about you, Mike?
Feature23.com, and I'm all over LinkedIn. So anybody who
There
wants
we go.
to connect, I'm always open. We use what's called a good neighbor policy at Feature 23, and we invite anybody who just wants to talk about this stuff. No contracts, no invoices. We love talking about it. If somebody's interested and wants to see how they might approach these topics, we're all about getting on a whiteboard, and we call it the good neighbor policy. Same as I would if I passed you taking the garbage out in the morning. Hey, George, what's up? We do the same thing, and hopefully we can help some people make some better decisions, whether we get work or not. But we're big on the good neighbor policy, so just hit us up.
That's awesome. I love that. I might steal that from you. Good neighbor
Yeah, steal
policy.
it.
That's awesome. Cool, man. Well, appreciate you coming on the show. We'll talk very soon.
Thanks, George. Appreciate it, man.